All right, got my trusty mic right here. I've been sticking it on other things to try and get it off my body when I'm shuffling around. So back to diesel fuel, because turbos are kind of figured out. If you got turbo questions, ask them in the comments, because I don't really know what to talk about as far as stuff I can talk about. There's some stuff I'll be a little bit hush hush, but okay. So we're going to be referencing this book. This is a book by Bosch for their uh, college courses. Here's a that book is like up to date. That's like there's actually a fifth edition one, but the fifth edition one really didn't know it's different. It wasn't that much thicker. It probably doesn't have as much stuff on the old systems. The newer the books get, the more they're going to focus on the newer systems. I'd imagine that a lot of you gals here are here because you're on older systems, even though if you're on that covers newer stuff. So, and this has some because Common Rail's not new, but regardless, here's a old one. This is a first edition version. You can see how much thinner it is than this one. This one mainly emphasizes mechanical injection. It's one of the big ones that's going to apply to this. So I'll put a picture of this page in here, but diesel fuel is injected at high pressures with peak pressures as high as 1200 bar. I am pretty sure in our performance diesel stuff with mechanical injection, we are exceeding that. Or we're below it because we royally screwed up the system. But this is, say, if you were designing a injection system for a engine back then. So diesel fuel is injected at high pressures with peak pressures as high as 1200 bar, which in future will be even higher. Remember, it's the old book. Such high pressures, the diesel fuel no longer behaves like a rigid liquid, but becomes compressible. Remember that, that's going to be important. During the brief delivery period, approximately 1 millisecond, the high pressure causes the injection system to expand at certain points, whereby the nozzle cross-section defines the quantity of fuel which is injected into the combustion chamber. So it's what moved into the combustion chamber through the nozzle has no correlation to what is displaced by the injection pump. That's going to be big because I just kind of got these two things clicking. What the injection pump displaces creates pressure by displacing the known volume into the high pressure side of the system. The fuel is compressible because of, yes, liquids are compressible, it just takes really high pressures, which we got. So the liquid gets compressed some. The injection line itself swells. Injection components, the injection pumping the injector can swell some as well. So this increased swell volume paired with the compression of the liquid creates what's called injection pump to injector delay. So when the injection pump starts moving fuel, that's defined as start of delivery. And when the fuel leaves the injector, that is defined as start of injection. The other thing too is that the injector will not open because the injector opens via pressure until the pressure wave, which is set up by the speed of sound, heat, pressure, sets that up. So the higher the pressure and the higher the temperature during the injection pump stroke, the higher the speed of sound is, and vice versa. The lower the pressure and the lower the temperature, the lower the speed of sound is in the fluid, which is number 2 diesel fuel. So the speed of sound sets up, and the injection line length paired with compressibility and swelling sets up that time it takes for the pressure wave to go from the injection pump to the injector. It's moving super fast. uh, but you also have to remember your piston is moving super fast. So in mechanical systems, they have to account for this. And they do. They have graphs, and we can look at some of those that show. They actually have a really good graph for the VP44 that shows it. We'll put this in. But that's why like timing values as the injection system components get larger start to kind of look dumb when in reality they're not quite as dumb as you think. And then on top of that, you have ignition delay, which is the period from when the fluid is traveling out of the injector and pulling heat out of the compression stroke and mixing with enough air to become burnable. Because remember, when it's in the injector line with no air, it's not oxygenated fuel, uh, it can get really stupid hot and not burn. Especially with the high pressure, it's not going to boil, and no air is not going to burn. It's just going to raise in temperature. None of the books really go over how uh, the increase in temperature through compression of the fuel in the line adjusts the temperature of the fuel exiting the nozzle, although going from high pressure to low pressure as it exits the nozzle will cause it to cool rapidly. So it might be maybe an irrelevant subject that's not worth investigating. Maybe I'm sure there's papers on it, right? But it's not in the books. We're not going to deal with it today. So that's right there in that one. And the other picture we'll be going over, there's actually a few. So this is the injection cycle for a VP44. So what's cool is this TL. So TL, so this is the injection pump side pressure. So it's coming up. And this is injector side pressure. So TL is the time in crank degrees it takes from when the injection pump actually initiates pressure. You can see that it gets the peak pressure about the time the pressure wave hits the injector, and then the pressure at the injector rises up. And then pressure at the injector is actually way higher than the pressure at the injection pump, which is kind of crazy. I don't know what that is. I don't know why the injector is fairly good, but the injection pump, you can see I'm gonna have to assume this is the reflected wave, or the delivery valve closing. This little bump, maybe DV closing and then reflected wave hitting. I don't know. All right. So a lot of this is me trying to help all of us out because I don't really know what's going on about these books to help out. So you don't see the reflected wave at the injector, but I think you might see it at the injection pump. They have it labeled as asterisk PLP, but they do not have um, a footnote as to what PLP is. Okay. The other thing is that's going to be mainly on this video. So I just want to start that off because that's going to help this other stuff make sense. Is doing this how the factory does it, which is grams kilowatt hour. It's this chart here, which I took a photo of that we're going to put in there. So we're going to be referencing focus. So these are target gram kilowatt hours. So if you were designing the motor, you would say the motor is going to need a motor that makes 500 horsepower. You take that, divide it by the grams kilowatt hour, and you do a bunch of like little things, and that takes you all the way back to how much fuel you have to inject per one stroke. All right. Why does all that matter? Well, because doing this on the performance side of things, we don't really have a reference point, right? Like I've been doing this stuff in pounds hour. There's only a few places, Caterpillar and whatnot, that rate stuff in pounds hour. All your common rails are mm cubed. All the factory data plates on our motors are mm cubed. So all of Cummins is for the most part rated grams kilowatt hour. So what I did was went and converted all that over. And then it's a lot of numbers. It's a lot of hundreds, thousands, and stuff like that. So it's easy. It's just the numbers they go from small, really big, back to really small again. So I'm going to flip this around. Don't worry about my handwriting. If you listen to me go through this, write it down what I say in your own handwriting, and then you can read it. But hopefully you can read this, right? I'm really good at welding, fabricating. Never said I was really good in English. Pretty sure on my website it says that I'm bad in English. Okay. So this, it'll stand up. Why did I have to write this out? Well, because it's not completely online. Okay. So we're using diesel fuel injection by Bosch. First edition turbo diesels are 225 to 195 grams per kilowatt ideal. Does that mean that's what they will be? No. That's what they shoot for from the factory. Normally aspirated, 240 to 210 grams kilowatt hour. Horsepower hour to kilowatt hour is horsepower times 0.7457. So if you take the horsepower multiplied by 0.7457, that'll convert it to kilowatt hour. And if you want to find out how take kilowatt hour and convert that to horsepower, it's kilowatt hour divided by 0.7457. And what's really bad is I'm starting to remember all these dumb numbers. Number 2 diesel weighs 0.82 to 0.85 grams milliliter or cc. So milliliter and a cc is the same thing. Microliters are mm cubed, milliliters are cc's. Okay, let's do the first generation Dodge. 165 horsepower at 2,500 RPMs. That's 119.312 kilowatt hours with 78 mm cubed. Now, I know it was brought up that possibly the data plate wasn't the actual injected quantity. This will show that the data plate injected quantity is correct, because what we're going to find at the end is that it's going to land in these numbers. So how to do this? You take 78 millimeters cubed times 6 cylinders times 1/2 engine RPM times 60 minutes, because remember, multiplying by the engine RPM is now giving you injection events minute, then times 60 for injection events in an hour, divide by 1,000 to convert to cc's / milliliters, multiply by point. You can multiply by whatever number you want. I used 0.84 out of that. 0.84 to convert from cc's to grams, then divide by the power output. So we take 78 times 6 times 1250 times 60 divided by 1,000 times 0.84. We get 29,484 grams hour. So divided by 119.312, that is 247.11 grams kilowatt hour. You'll see that that is a little bit high, but actually it ends up kind of being normal. This is probably because of emissions reasons. And 184.275 grams horsepower hour. So that's like a good test point, right? That's a good starting point. We can go over here to QSB 6.7. I know this isn't the latest or greatest one. This is but I'll put in, I'm going to put in the CPL tags for these just so you can see it. So it's 275 horsepower, 205 kilowatts at 2,500 RPMs. Couldn't find the one for the truck ones that are 400. 129 mm cubed. So 129 times 6 cylinders times 1,250, it's 1/2 engine RPM, times 60, divided by 1,000 is 58,050 cc's, times 0.84 is 48,762 grams, divided by 275 is 177.316 grams horsepower hour. And that 205 kilowatts, that's 237.863 grams. That should be kW, kilowatt. Sorry. So if we compare that, the 6.7 with the common rail injection system is more efficient than the first generation Dodge with the VE injection pump. flywheel. 247, 237, which it should be. That means even though it's injecting more fuel, it's making more power with the same amount of fuel. So if this was pulled back to 78 millimeters cubed, what we would see is a higher power output flywheel with the 6.7 than with the 5.9. Higher injection pressures tend to lower this value. ISB 235 24 valve VP trucks. This should be a engine out of a VP. 235 horsepower at 2,700 RPMs. That's why it would have been nice to have the truck version. This is a industrial of some kind. 235 horsepower at 2,700 RPMs, 103 mm cubed. 103 times 6 times 1350, 1/2 that, times 60, divided by 1,000, 50,000, 28 cc/milliliters, times 0.84 is 42,000, 48.72 grams. That comes out to, you divide it by horsepower. I didn't put I did put the kilowatts on here. It's 175.23 kilowatts, 235 horsepower. That comes out to 178.9 grams horsepower, 393 grams horsepower, 239.96 grams kilowatt. Pretty close. Right? These are all falling within what Bosch's technical stuff is. Right? We look at an IDI, 6.2 IDI. Now this one's kind of complicated because I'll put in the thing. This is done how Americans do it, which is pounds fuel hour. So we have to do a little bit extra work, but this is using a brochure or some kind of thing from wherever. It's 130 horsepower at 2,900 RPMs with a brake-specific fuel consumption ratio of 0.420. All right, to figure this one out. Oh, and I found a shortcut to all this, but if you wanted to like really practice what you're doing, 130 times 0.420 is 54.6 pounds fuel hour. 56.4 divided by 60 is 0.91 pounds fuel minute. Divided by 8 cylinders is 0.11375 pounds fuel minute per one cylinder. Divide by 0.001844 to convert to cc's. That's 61.866 cc's. Times 1,000 to convert to mm cubed. That's 61,686.55 millimeters cubed minute, I believe. Divide by 1/2 engine RPM. So it's 1450 because 2,900. That's 42.542 millimeters cubed per injector per injection event, which actually follows pretty closely with the 7.3 and 6.9. They're making more power. IDIs. Let's play with those. So we have 42.542 times 8 cylinders times 1450, 1/2 engine RPM, times 60 divided by 1,000, you 29,609.5 cc's times 0.84 gives you 24,872 grams. Divided by horsepower, it's 191.32 grams horsepower, and for kilowatts, because it's 96.941 kilowatt hours, it's 256.56 grams kilowatt hour. So you can see it's fairly, it's not terrible, right? It's not terrible. Is it less fuel efficient, technically speaking, at full power compared to the other systems? Yes, but it's not terrible. This should, technically speaking, after you see this, you should be able to take this and then find out if you inject more fuel, how much more power it should make. Flywheel. Okay, next one. The very bottom, it's a little bit messy. The OEM 180 pump V700, 88 mm. Oh, the shortcut is you can take 54.6 pounds fuel hour and just go ahead and divide it by 0.001844, and that kicks you right down to 29,609.5 cc's. So you can skip all this stuff. Knowing how to do that stuff is helpful. It's good practice, but if you don't want to do it, just take that number, divide it by 0.001844, and you'll just skip all the way to right here. Pretty neat. Okay, the OEM 180 pump, 88 mm cubed, 180 flywheel horsepower, 2,500 RPMs. I kind of shortcutted a lot of this stuff because we're getting towards the end here. It's 33,264 grams. Oh, this one was for wheel horsepower. I didn't do the one thing. So because this is going to go into this part here. So these trucks make about 145 wheel horsepower. So 33,264 divided by 145 is 229.4 grams horsepower, or 307.65 grams kilowatt hour, because 145 horsepower is 108.12 kilowatts. So why is this important? Well, we can actually, this is going to come all the way back around. So this is how to use this backwards. This is my dyno. I've already done this on quite a few setups. It's a my dyno averages and a wheel horsepower output given the tune-up is good, and there's plenty of turbocharger, about 240 grams wheel horsepower. Why does this matter? Well, because if you go check different dynos, this number moves around. Same with, like, say, the brake number moves around. So if you don't want to use, if you want to be more technical about it, we'll use the way the Cummins measures it. For my dyno, it likes 240 grams fuel horsepower. That's what it averages on a truck that has no EGT problems, is smoke free, and it's screaming. So here we go. So, and this is going to change, like calibrated power, their dyno, I want to say when I was watching their tuning videos, it was around 140 grams wheel horsepower. Firepunk's dyno is around 140 to 145 grams horsepower. So this is how you can use this as a tuning tool, because if you know what the dyno number is generally going to spit out based off of fuel flow, you now have a target to get to. So if you do all this and you find that you're not at 240, say you're at 300, you can know you got tuning to do, or injection pumps to change, or different air setups to do. Like, there's stuff you want to do. But if I reached a point on my dyno of 240 grams per horsepower for the dyno that I have, because I can't change the dyno, that's awesome. That's good. I should see a system that's smoke free, system that has EGTs that are less than 1500 degrees. EGTs are kind of funny because they're going to be dependent too on the cylinder temperature, which gets weird. But the big thing should be that it should run just as clean as the rest of these, right? If you're at this point. So 4 and 3 wheel horsepower times 240 is 96,720 grams. Divided by 0.84 is 115,142.857 cc's. Times 1,000 to go to mm cubed is 115,142,857.1 mm cubed. Divided by 60, because this is an hour, is 1,919,047.619 mm cubed. Divided by 1/2 engine RPM, 1,500, equals 1,279.365079 divided by 6 cylinders is 213.2275 mm cubed. So per one injection event, between my injectors and my injection pump, it's moving 213.2275 mm cubed. Now we can go here, mm cubed times 6 times, oh, this is unnecessary. You can, how did I do this? Don't remember the shortcut I took. I'm just going to do it this way though, real quick. M cubed times 6 times 1,500 divided by 1,000. Oh, it's like right there. 1,919.0475 cc's divided by 6 cylinders, because that's total cc's, gives you 319.841 cc's. My injection pump is calibrated to 320 cc's at 1,000 pump strokes. But the power output peak is at 3,000 RPMs. And this is going to go full circle back around to the whole compression crap. So I actually don't see what the pump is calibrated to with the injectors that I have until I reach 3,000 RPMs because it's 219.2275 mm cubed is what's actually being moved through the injector, which does not equal 320 cc's at 1,000 pump strokes. It equals 320 cc's at 1,500 pump strokes, and there is nothing wrong with that. But where it gets tricky is it comes out 240 grams horsepower and 321.8 grams kilowatts, and this is at the tire. That's not bad. That's at the tire. So you can see at the flywheel, we're averaging around 170 to 190. At tire after drivetrain losses, 240. That's pretty good. 321 per kilowatt. I don't measure in kilowatts. I just did all this so you guys can see. But that I try and measuring at the flywheel is to show that the base value is equal to what Bosch is after. Measuring the flywheel is actually how you can compare dynos to one another and find what an efficient tune on that dyno looks like. And once you know what an efficient tune on the dyno looks like, because it's going to change per dyno, now you have a goal to get to. So that's what's going on here. So say if it was, like I said, if it was at 300, then I'd have a problem, right? I would want to work on my timing. I might want to switch out injectors. Maybe the injectors are too big or too small. I would want to change things around, increase boost pressure or increase the exhaust flow side. Maybe it's going in peak torque too soon, so I'm running out of engine RPM to try and burn that efficiently. There's a bunch of your problem solving once you can open up and see what the problem looks like. But okay, why is it 320 cc's at 1,500 and not 320 cc's at 1,000? Well, if I don't have a pump flow test. I do have a fair. Okay, so you know how we talked about all right, so why does my information not match the pump test stand? Very easy answer. The injectors I'm running are not the same injectors that were on the pump test stand. Problem solved. So that's where stuff gets relatively tricky now, right? Because now if your injection pump was flowed with your injectors, your information is rock solid. Like the fluid moved out the injector is 100%. That's correct. And when you use that to look at dyno data and see how the system's doing, that's extremely accurate. The majority have injection pumps that are calibrated separate from their injectors. So using that stuff, if your injection pump and injectors are calibrated together, fantastic. It makes tuning an absolute breeze because we know the injected quantity at the RPMs, and we can look at the dynograph and the power made at different RPMs and see how the system's working. We can look at where it was doing at peak torque, in between peak torque, at peak horsepower, everywhere, because we know what the injection pump is, depending on how much data the person that built the pump gives you, right? If you get it per whatever you have, every 200 RPMs, 500,000, preferably 500 is a good one to pick. So remember how, this is going to go into, so remember how we talked about diesel being compressible because of quite a few reasons. Now the next thing is with mechanical pumps, because it's a positive displacement pump, but you have a fixed size restrictor. The injector orifice restriction never changes, but the rate at which the plunger travels, its displacement volume increases. That's this guy right here. So that's pump speed and pressure. So at low pump speeds, the pressure rise is small because the injector will start displacing the volume. It can displace the volume at a rate that's closer to the displacement rate of the injection pump. And as pump speed goes up, the pressure goes up. So this is kind of where I'm getting an idea that a certain injector size actually comes with an RPM target that injector is going to want to be at, because the injection pressure is important to getting the grams horsepower number down, or pounds fuel hour down. Doesn't matter how you want to look at it. I just did it that way because that's how the OEM does it. Injection pressure is important. So the bigger the injector gets with the pump's displacement volume and pump speed staying the same, the lower the pressure gets. Now the displacement volume at the injector can go up, but it's going up at the cost of the injection pressure going down. So, and where that really gets you is at lower pump speeds, it'll show its ugly face the most. That's why like the larger injectors tend to be harder to get them to run cleanly at lower RPMs, even with extra air and light tuning, is the injection event quality is lackluster. So, like if I had my 320cc pump and I went from my 5x14 to a 5x20, what I should see is more smoke down low. I mean, it's going to be moving more quantity, but I can pull the fuel back, but it's still going to be harder to get that smoke or haze to go away because the injection pressure went down. And what I should see is that it's going to want to operate at a efficient grams horsepower or pounds minute number at a higher engine RPM. And the smaller the injector gets, the better it's going to run closer to idle. I think there's a correlation there. I'm not 100% sure. This is like new stuff that I'm just popping off with. But I think that's going to hold true based off of what I'm seeing in the textbooks and just looking back on history with a lot of the stuff I've done. So what that almost means is that with a certain injector, you're almost going to have a certain turbo combination, because the turbocharger itself, mainly the turbine side, sets up the range where the system's efficient at. So as far as engine volumetric efficiency goes, stuff to think about. So that's kind of that. I'm gonna probably close this up a little bit, but after going over that, here's this guy. Okay, it's got a message I know it's for. All right, so what this is like me just drawing out real quick kind of what's going on. So at low pump speeds, you get low pressure for a long amount of time, because say you have it on for the same amount of time. Say we just held the rack at a certain position, you would get this. What happens, because if the rack position stays the same, as RPM's going up, time's getting shorter, but pressure is going up. And what will eventually happen is fuel flow at the injector is a combination of both time and pressure. And what happens is, because the rate of discharge doesn't increase proportionally to the increase in pressure, the system almost self-governs out. So what will happen is the pressure will keep going up, and it gets better and better. Stop that from happening. Better and better. And then eventually, though, the time that it's at the higher pressure is going to get so short that the injector volume here is the same as here, and then the injector volume here is actually less than here, even though this is at higher pressure. So as with a mechanical system, with the delivery, with the spill port, or the plunger, whatever you want to call it, racks kept in the same spot, or the spill port open kept in the same spot. As RPM goes up, you keep raising the pressure because the restrictor is the same, but the plunger is sweeping the distance faster and faster. So it's compressing that amount of fuel into the high pressure side of the line. In less time, the pressure goes up, but time at pressure goes down, and what flows out the injector is a factor of pressure and time. So eventually what happens, like I said, is these two sides start to get really close together, so you end up with a lot of pressure, but not a lot of time. So this is where like sizing the injector and engine RPM and pump displacement, which is your calibration number, start to get like, this stuff is, well, it doesn't seem to be, probably is really important. I don't quite know how what to do with it, other than I know that it's happening, right? So it kind of actually looks more like is, to get the system to be efficient, you almost have to overshoot on the injection pump size, but limit the rack travel a little bit. Now, what happens, so what's important with that is if you have a really gnarly pump and you pull the plate, say the fuel plate all the way back, and you limit how long the plunger's sweeping for, and how long delivery starts for, you end up doing this right out of the box. And I think this is what's happening when, like, some trucks, I've done some that have like 700cc pumps, and then you pull the fuel plate all the way back to 300, and they can't spool a turbocharger. And it has something to do with the injector actually needs to be on, ideally, during power production, or at least ramping up to power production, for a certain amount of crank degrees. So if you have a really big pump and you pull the plate all the way back to, say it's 700cc pump, and you pull all the way back to 300, you end up with this starting here, and then as it goes forward, it just gets worse out of the bat. So I used to be of the mindset that the duration should be as short as possible, but I've had a few applications I've done turbos for where I couldn't get the turbo to work, and they were big injection pumps, not on really anything crazy injector wise, but they were trying to run the fuel plate all the way back. And at the time, I thought that that's how you should do it anyways, right? If you wanted just less power, just less duration. But it actually, what it looks like is according to the Bosch books, there's actually a window, basically like a jet flame that the injector needs to be on for as the piston travels to make proper cylinder pressure and produce proper engine torque. You can't just have it wick off super fast and then end. You end up with no energy to drive the turbocharger and a lack of energy to drive the piston down, it seems like, which is contrary to what I've believed to be true for a long time, right? So stuff to think about. I don't know really what to do with any of that stuff towards the end there. It just seems that seems actually stuff that's in these books paired with that seems to make sense with big pumps turn all the way down. It almost, like I said, seems that the plate needs to be, say, somewhere, at least the stock location, which is 14 to 15 millimeters of rack travel, is kind of actually the ideal minimum you'd want to run the fuel setup at. With a like the smaller size injector, or even a bigger size injector, but you want to oversize the pump. That way you get you'd have big pressure jumps, and then you'd have time at pressure. Because, like I said, the only thing that moves fuel out of the injector is pressure and time. And how you get pressure and time is the injection pump's cam shape and plunger size and plunger speed does displacement volume and how fast it sweeps that displacement volume. Yeah, those two things, because that would the how fast sweeps displacement volume sets up time and sets up pressure, and then displaced volume sets up. Yes, yeah, both of those go hand in hand. So stuff to think about. So yeah, much you guys might enjoy this one. This is actually using informational stuff for once, not just stuff off the top of my head. Doing it backwards, the pounds minute and pounds hour fuel stuff all just comes back around to being the same thing, but it's not as useful when if you go look at like an OEM setup data sheet, you want to compare what that looks like out the exhaust versus, and relatively, I would say EGT should be in there somewhere. I just don't know how EGT kind of works when you get to the bigger power stuff. Because that's going to be more of a injector on time and amount of time for cooling and stuff like that. That's a lot. I can't think of anything more. I mean, I can think of plenty more, but I gotta get to work. So, yeah, you guys know why the injection pump doesn't inject the amount of fuel that it's calibrated at. We know how to work our own system in reverse to see where we stand, to estimate what we're moving. Ideally, you would get the system to burning relatively clean on the dyno, light haze to clean, and then you would go do this stuff, because with smoke in the mix or overly clean, it gets a little difficult, right? Because that's where like an AFR gauge would come in handy. But if you're kind of in that middle range, where you're nothing's really out of proportion either direction. This should be applicable to find out the field delivery. And if it's common rail or power stroke, the Huey system's super easy. It's cc's 1,000 strokes, which is basically whatever the cc number is, millimeters cubed. Those are pretty easy to do. So yeah, most trucks I've looked up 7.3 IDIs, 6.9 IDIs. I haven't done the 6.5 yet. But I did 6.2, 6.2, and I imagine 6.5 is also in pounds horsepower. But the IDIs are in mm on the data plate. So they're not. None of the diesels are nearly as bad as they've been made out to be. I'm probably gonna end it with that. Modifying the injection system without repercussions, because it's diesel and they don't die when they get kind of really out of whack, has, in my estimations, been what's given certain engine platforms a bad rap and a misunderstanding of the fuel system and the injection system. Like I said, I don't know what to do with some of this stuff. I just have it in my head and I can kind of picture it. What to do with it, I don't quite know yet. Getting there. Like some of this stuff, obviously, we can use, and some of it, don't really know what to tell you there. But, yep. I hope you guys enjoyed. Have a good one.